Hello, welcome to AT&T ThreatTraq for December 20th, 2012. This program provides network security highlights, discussion, and countermeasures for cyber threats. Joining us on the program today, we have Michael Singer, Jim Clausing, and Stan Nurilov. And thanks, guys, for joining us today. I'm Brian Rexroad, and, well, let's just start with a little bit of small talk here. I guess, is everybody getting ready for the holidays?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think we're all looking forward to coming into a new year. And I thought, what will we do today? And I guess as a group here, we decided we'll talk about some of the top security concerns and some of the challenges that we'll have in 2013. It's becoming a little bit of a tradition for the program. And with that, let's go ahead and get right into it. And first of all, there were a couple of references that I shared with the group here, and we used as sort of inputs to this. I wanted to at least give credit to the folks that had sort of were contributions to this discussion here. First was a posting by Tom Cross on 5 key computer network security challenges for 2013. I thought it was a very good article that really brought some significant points to light. One of the things that most of the items that we would identify as significant as well. We're going to add a few to that. And then another article, this one's by Tim Raines from Microsoft, and he was using the past to predict the future. I thought that was kind of a good way of looking at things, the top 5 threat predictions for 2013. And his perspective was more at the software level, I think kind of not surprisingly being a representative of Microsoft in that discussion. But what we're going to do is walk through what we found to be the top 10 and provide a little discussion on that, a little insights into the context of how we came to these conclusions. And what we'll start with here is first, Stan, what did you think was an important item in the list today?
Well, I think one of the most important things we're going to see next year is the same thing we saw this year and actually has been building on for several years, which is advanced persistent threats. What I think is going to be another change is basically that it's going to evolve. There's going to be new players introduced. I think a lot of the people who right now work in the APT research field, they have some conception that maybe there's only a few actors in the game. But I think next year we're going to see a lot more different maybe states participating in it. And I think we're going to see an evolution in the type of malware that we see. I think we're going to see people or the malware authors or these APT actors start to use more advanced techniques. And what we're going to see is probably that new players are going to use the old techniques, the easier techniques that are easier to detect that we saw in years past. And then the new and then the old actors who have been in this field for a while, who have their tools already, they're going to evolve them to the next level. So we're going to see new obfuscation techniques probably. We're going to see better persistent techniques. So just an overall evolution in advanced persistent threats, I think we're going to definitely see next year and probably for several years to come.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think this was sort of the year of realization, in my opinion, that as in 2012, I think a much larger contingent, the community has become much more aware of advanced persistent threats. I don't know if it's because the activity has grown significantly, or if it's just more of it is being discovered and paid attention to. But certainly, as you know, Stan, we've had quite a number of discoveries that we have, helped customers with over the last year, and are certainly continuing to identify new techniques that are being used and investigating those further. So I agree with you. This is certainly one of the ones near the top of the list.
And I think some of the researchers have also started to work closer together, even from different organizations, and are more willing to talk about this.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just going to actually push us more in the evolution next year.
Yeah. Well, and being willing to talk about it, I think, is a big part of it, right? I think we've learned quite a lot by getting involved in some sharing activities, and it's a learning experience for us. It takes a little extra effort to be able to share things out, and in two respects, you have to kind of take a gulp a little bit and be willing to share information. But that's been an improvement overall, I think, as well.
And it's something that our community has needed for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Bad guys talk a whole lot more than we do. So.
Yes, that's absolutely true, and it's a culture change that we're developing, and I think there's, again, one of the challenges here is as a network service provider, we have to protect the privacy of our customers, but in terms of understanding the techniques and the tools that are being used, it is an opportunity to share information and help the community as a whole. Good point. So the next item we have here, Michael, what do you think is next?
I think giant DDoS attacks is next.
All right.
And if I think back, a few years ago, I remember making a mental note when we hit that 3 gigabit per second mark and thinking that was a big attack. And obviously in 2012, I had to replace 3 with a much larger number, around 60 gigs. And I think it's conceivable that in 2013 we might get 3 digits. We might go over 100 gigabits per second. I think that the types of devices participating will be broader: infected cloud applications, mobiles, connected household devices. And then I think it's also likely that we'll see some attacks with the volunteer component like we did with Operation Payback back a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, we've been reporting a number of types of things. We had a discussion just a little bit ago about how abuses of DNS have been growing, not just a little bit, but significantly in terms of frequency at least, and the sophistication around that, and certainly abuses of other types of services is taking place. We've seen that in these attacks against the financial community that have been taking place. It's evolved to using web servers as the attack mechanism as opposed to, the conventional wisdom in the past where botnets were built of knowing consumers of poorly administered machines. Now we have professionally administered machines, or at least presumably so, that are being used as a part of the attack vector. So certainly growing in terms of scope, the capacity, and the capabilities of this denial of service attacks. And I guess what's worse is they're not just capable, they're using them. So you kind of alluded to the cloud aspect, Michael. Does that kind of lead us to another one?
Yeah, absolutely. Moving data to the cloud, I think it's inevitable. At some point, it's all going to be stored in somebody's cloud, either a private cloud or the public cloud. And you can do as good of a job in the cloud as you can do inside of your data centers, but it takes focus. We were calling these kind of small perimeters, or some people call them tall fences, around the data. Mm-hmm. And I would start with the strong authentication, multi-factor authentication, encryption of the data. And then the key, I think, to, once you get to that situation where you have your small perimeter around your data, is to do the 24/7 monitoring. Make sure the logging is turned on. You have tools that are correlating those logs. You have people who know what to look for and have procedures in place, what to do when events occur.
Mm-hmm. A lot of folks have talked about, some of the things that you need to consider in moving to the cloud. And, when you're putting it in your own data center, you know where it is. And by moving it to cloud, there are some benefits in doing that, but you have to, put a little additional thought into where the data is going, how you're going to manage it, make sure it's still there. And, this is sort of a variation, this particular point, a variation on what Tom Cross had pointed out a little bit earlier, in the reference that we pointed out a little bit earlier. And, his was combining this notion of consumerization of IT and the cloud as being one of the challenges. And, his focus was maintaining the visibility, you kind of alluded to that, and maintaining control of the data that is where it is located, making sure that it stays there and having confidence in that. And I thought he had sort of a good point there, is that now we've got sort of a, what is considered somewhat of a commodity, and it's going to take some extra effort that is insistence, if you will, to make sure that the cloud services are living up to the same level of expectation, providing those tall fences as you suggested.
Right.
Absolutely. So we've gotten through 3 of them here, and the next one here, I think this is one that's near and dear to your heart, right, Jim?
Well, it's one that I spent some time this year looking into. So, this year we had a number of major password breaches that hit the news, and I think that's going to continue. We've had passwords. We all agree passwords aren't a perfect solution, but finding a better one has proved to be difficult. Finding a good way to replace passwords.
Mm-hmm. The thing that drives me nuts is the notion of default passwords. We've seen these, we've been talking about this security surveillance camera, DVR botnet, and it's one that's really taking advantage of the fact that there's not really a password set on the devices for the administrative access to those platforms. And to my knowledge, I don't even think they provide any instruction whatsoever with the product that indicates that the user needs to set a password for the device. So I think fundamentally there are all kinds of aspects of password management that need to be improved on. We've got too many that we're expected to remember, so people are using the same password on different systems. It gets compromised in one place, so you end up getting compromised in another place. And these default passwords are a big problem. They facilitate building botnets and all kinds of other problems.
And how they're transmitted and how they're protected, in the application or the database or whatever. Earlier this year, when I had analyzed some of them, I had briefly mentioned, MD5 is not a great choice for hashing the passwords, especially if you're not salting them,
mm-hmm.
And the people have made these same mistakes over and over again, and there are better ways to store them, but
mm-hmm.
getting people to buy into actually using them is going to be long and cumbersome, I think.
Absolutely. So hopefully we'll get a little bit of progress. It certainly continues to be a challenge, and I know that we have activities that are certainly underway to be able to extend a more cohesive identity management solution to our customers. So hopefully we'll be making some good progress on that in the next year. Next item here I'm going to go ahead and introduce, which is Sabotage to computer networks. And we've got one very good specific example. We've been concerned about this type of thing for a long time, but actually came to fruition in a fairly large scale, referring specifically to the Shamoon malware that was deployed in a oil company. And the consequence of that was it wasn't a particularly sophisticated type of attack. But what it did that was really kind of damaging is that it went toward the directory servers that support the enterprise and used that as a propagation mechanism to get the desktops to accept that malware, and it was a destructive piece of malware that basically what's been reported is about 30,000 machines in that organization were basically erased. So we see that as something that any organization needs to be concerned about, and making sure that there are good backup plans in place for the data associated with their enterprise, and making sure that we're making strides toward being able to detect these types of things before they're able to deploy, and perhaps shutting them down more quickly once some type of malicious activity has taken place, so that it can have at least limiting effects associated with those things. So I see that as a particularly significant challenge, and certainly the one that we're paying attention to. So some of the ones that we've traditionally been concerned about, I guess, Stan, what do you think about botnets?
Well, I think that they're just going to continue to evolve as they have been for years. I think maybe some people are starting to put that a little bit on the back burner on their top 10 lists, but I still think it's going to be one of these things that's going to persevere through. And it's going to evolve just like the APT threat. It's already been doing so for embedded devices, for devices in your home. So it's something that we're going to need to pay attention to. And I think some of the researchers also need to be open-minded to the fact that it's going to affect new devices, not just traditional PCs. So it's going to go to tablets, it's going to go to mobile devices. I think it's going to go to, and it's already been going to embedded devices. Just the other day, I was reading an article about a research group that created some malware that was able to take over TVs that are a very popular brand of TVs that are in many homes. And this brand of TV, it has a network port and some embedded operating system. And, it's possible to take it over, just like any other operating system. And people can control these and then use them in some of the other types of threats, like the DDoS or stealing information, or even, and this is something we've seen from the crime portion of the malware authors, is that they rent out these botnets, make money on it, steal private information, steal banking credentials. One more thing to point out there is that I think people at home are actually going to have to start to be more vigilant about what they have running on their home network. I think the amount of devices that we now connect to our home internet connection has exploded. We have all the family phones, smartphones that are connecting through Wi-Fi. We have these TVs. We have gaming consoles, besides just the traditional PCs. And while we have any of that can become part of a botnet. And while we have security solutions for some of those devices, I don't think we really have good security solutions for all of those devices that encompass the whole slew of heterogeneous devices that could be present in any home. And really what's difficult is that for some of the consumers, they're going to have to become network administrators in their own house to manage all the different devices to secure them. I think that's going to come up a lot more in the next few years. Maybe we're not ready quite to tackle that problem next year, but I think within 3 years, we'll probably see a push from the industry to start securing home networks with the same vigilance we've seen that done in the enterprise.
Yeah. Stan, I think you're right. You started out, you kind of said about, the evolution of the technology with the botnets. I think you made a very similar reference or even an emphasis associated with the advanced persistent threats. And, one of the things that I think is a little bit underappreciated is, at least in my opinion, I think the botnets technologically, at least what has been exposed, are significantly more technologically advanced than the advanced persistent threats. The reason the advanced persistent threats are able to sneak through is partly because the quantity of them is so much smaller. And so in the botnets where they're doing sort of mainstream type things or sort of mass quantity types of infections, it exposes them more. So it raises the level of awareness, but underlying that, the rootkits that are involved with it, the command and control protocols that are associated with them, the variety of malware that's involved, in my opinion, appears to be actually more sophisticated than what is generally exposed in the APT stuff. Now, that doesn't mean that the advanced persistent threats don't have more sophisticated capabilities in their belt. Perhaps they're more deliberate about what they're willing to expose, but certainly what's been, what's out there seems to be the botnets are more sophisticated.
I tend to agree with that assessment. I think maybe at this point, in some respects, not everybody kind of works for the government, which we suspect APTs are sponsored by nation states. So just freelance hackers, they have to, in order to make money, right, they have to follow the money trail, which would be to create this more complex type of malware, create these more complex botnets so they can gain access to more computers, they can rent them out for DDoS, again, steal private information on the network, things like that. With APT, certainly there are threat actors out there who are very advanced. But like you said, Brian, the majority of the type of APT malware we've dealt with, that hasn't been as complex as some of the just regular malware that's part of botnets. And I think both of that's all going to change. It's going to continue to evolve, and it's going to continue to get more and more complicated.
Yeah, absolutely. So while the botnets are trying to get in from the outside, Michael?
Yes, insider threats. Consistently, when there are these surveys to people in IT groups and security groups, and they ask them what they're worried about, insider threats pretty high on the list. And then I've seen some research showing that it doesn't always make it that high on the list when it comes to projects and funding and actual activity. So it seems to get underappreciated as a threat. And I'll share with you, some of the things that we've been doing for quite a while to help in this area. I mean, starting with background checks, and having your people consent to monitoring with the devices that they're using on the network, the 24/7 incident response process, and watching for repeat offenses. The same address, the same actor, doing things over time and treating that differently, having different procedures in place. And then from a policy perspective, setting up separation of duties, kind of building that into your processes, role-based permissions that are periodically reviewed. Now, a lot of those things help, but even if you're doing all those things, I still feel like you need to be doing more, and you should never think that you're there. So I do expect in 2013 there will be some stories about leakage or sabotage, and it's going to be, it's the person who they onboarded and they gave them that permission.
Yeah, Michael, I think you're absolutely right here. I'm not so much convinced that it's not considered as much of a problem, but I think in many respects, at least this has been my own personal opinion, that dealing with an insider threat has kind of been overwhelming in terms of the types of things that you need to be considering. And, you mentioned the consent to monitoring. That doesn't work in all environments. There are some countries, some areas where it's not as acceptable to be, performing monitoring activities on employees to make sure that they're not doing things that they're not supposed to be doing. So there's still lots of challenges associated with managing the insider threat. And, like I said, it just becomes sort of overwhelming. And you mentioned there are a number of things that we have been doing, and that's in making improvements there. I'll just mention, we mentioned earlier, that identity management is a big part of it as well. It is having some centralized means to understand and maintain what accesses are granted to a particular person, and making sure that those controls are specific to the responsibilities they have in their job.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, we kind of talked around this next one here, Jim. We talked a little bit about botnets, and so botnets could be going in new places as well, right?
Yeah, another one that's near and dear to my heart is the mobile malware. It's something that we've been talking about on this program since the beginning, since we first went on the air. And it's, my research interests for the last couple of years. And we've seen it grow rather rapidly over the last couple of years, and I absolutely expect that trend to continue into 2013. Just this past week, another one hit the press here about the what got called it Spam Soldier. It's a piece of malware that I've actually taken a look at, and it's spreading via SMS, which is something, a threat vector that we've talked about, suspected was going to happen for quite some time.
Yeah.
This malware spams out SMS messages, and if somebody on the receiving end clicks on it, they get infected, and then they in turn send it out, but the malware hides it from the user. So, yeah, the mobile devices, the smartphones, the tablets, you're going to see a lot more malware because the devices have become more powerful, got more computing power. And when they could barely, do much more than handle the phone calls, so there wasn't a big reason to use them. Malicious activity, but they're getting more and more powerful, and so we're going to see more.
Yeah, Jim, along those lines, I couldn't help but notice the irony of the statement that you made that we've been talking about mobile malware since this program went on the air. That whole sort of phrase kind of comes from the back when television was broadcast over antennas and or radio was broadcast over antennas. This program sort of started out, if you will, as something that really goes over wires over the internet. But here we are, as we talk about the proliferation of mobile data. Here it is. It's going back over the air.
Absolutely. I watched it on my tablet.
Yeah, so absolutely. The mobile malware thing is kind of developing these, as you mentioned, this recent botnet that was discovered. It's relatively small. It hasn't been proliferating that much, but some of the things that we're seeing is this notion of being able to create malware that runs across different platforms provides a lot more opportunity to proliferate malware to more types of devices, and I expect that we're going to see more of that as the technology develops. This next one is one that's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. It's this notion of treating critical IT infrastructure as critical. And I think this is sort of a cultural thing that underlies the notion of the Internet, I think, is that, the Internet kind of started out as a research project. It certainly has grown significantly beyond that. I think to a large extent, that maybe even to consider it as by a lot of organizations or a lot of folks at least, that it's sort of an entertainment network per se. You go out and browse for, or perhaps do online shopping, that sort of thing. But more and more businesses fundamentally are dependent on the Internet as their line of business, and more things that are really critical to just the way we function as a society are more critical or dependent on information technology as a means to stay working. And an example was an article that came out just recently related to the GPS system, that is a global positioning system where it could easily be manipulated or jammed and basically take out navigation capabilities. And I think one of the fundamental things that needs to be thought about here, I think the airlines are doing this in those cases, but perhaps not in all cases, that is, you can't really depend on a platform like GPS as your sole means of being able to provide a navigation service in that particular case. That is, if you're really dependent on it, you have to have backups, and that's why, like in the United States, we'll still have the VHF omnidirectional range as a backup navigation system. Airliners still have inertial navigation systems as well. So it's those kinds of things that we really need to be thinking about. I think back a little bit about some time ago, there was a realization that emergency services personnel were starting to depend on Twitter as a means to communicate among the emergency responders. And they started to realize that if Twitter wasn't working, it wasn't intended as a critical IT tool at the time. And so they started to realize that perhaps wasn't the best idea. They either needed to work on hardening Twitter and consider it a critical infrastructure, or move to an alternative means. And, another example is a lot of the computer emergency response teams kind of depend on email as a communications means to deal with emergencies, that is, computer emergencies that, in fact, are using the same systems for that communications that they're trying to diagnose and repair. So I think we need to be thinking about these things a little bit more. Certainly there are a lot of people thinking about it, perhaps a little more action around that. So I think it's certainly a challenge for 2013 as well.
Well, and it's not a new one. I mean, the email thing about emergency responders was one of the big issues with the Morris worm back in '88.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not a new challenge. It's something that we haven't done a very good job of
Right.
But.
And last but not least here, I guess, Stan, you had one that was kind of, you sounded a little passionate about when we were preparing this.
I think privacy education is going to become a lot more important. Well, it's always been important, really. But I'm hopeful, really this one is a hope of mine, that people will start to take it more seriously. They'll educate themselves more about how exactly information about them is available online. How is it, every time they visit a website, they leave a little trail behind. And are they okay with leaving that trail? Are they, it's okay to leave that trail, but are you aware of that? And I think that next year is just, we're going to hear more about things like that, where there's going to be even more stories about, people weren't aware that, of a certain privacy policy, even though they had agreed to it. And then there'll be a little bit of a surprise. So I think it's going to be educational, even more so than before. Certain businesses might take more of your privacy and use it as part of their business model. And, it all kind of leads back to being careful about making sure you understand what services you're agreeing to and how the information about you is going to be used. And, it might be totally fine if you agree to it. And I think we're going to see a lot more where people are going to start to realize that, how the information is out there and how it's being used. And, hey, maybe some people will say, you know what, now I don't think we should be using my information that way. Or maybe, we'll just continue the way we do now. It's just that the field has been evolving. A lot more businesses are basing their whole business around selling information about users. So it's something very important. It's been important. I think it's going to continue to be important. I just think that there might be more realizations about it and how things are used. Yeah. And kind of, I had a couple of things that went under privacy about cloud hosting providers and things like that. It's not exactly privacy, but I did want to mention that I think a big challenge for people, especially consumers, might be understanding the service level agreements that they're signing up for when they're signing up for some cloud services providers. For example, knowing that their data may or may not be there with a certain amount of availability, things like that. So I think it's very important, even though it was last on our list.
Yeah. Well, and these aren't in any particular order, but I think you're absolutely right. One of the things, at least my observation around the privacy protection issue is, first of all, there are two aspects of it. And we have it sort of portrayed here as a perception issue. That is, I think there's really kind of a gap in preferences, and some might even equate it to being associated with a generation gap as well. That is, there are those that are perfectly willing to share basically almost anything about themselves and not really be concerned about privacy of their information. That is, having a sort of a realization, or maybe even perhaps in many cases they're naive about it, but a realization that their information about them could be out and anywhere, and then maybe not being even the slightest bit concerned about that. Whereas I think sort of the traditional mindset is that, I don't want anybody knowing anything that I don't, deliberately share myself. I don't want others sharing information on my behalf. And that's a very complex problem to deal with if you're going to use services, especially services that are provided for free. That is, I think we've talked about this notion many times. The notion of a free app isn't really free. There's a business model behind that, and it may, in fact, involve sharing information as a part of that. There's information about you as a user and how you behave and where you've been, that sort of thing. And if you grant those permissions, then that's basically what you're paying, how you pay for those applications. And in some cases, access to websites that are, provide social networking services as a part of the benefit. But behind the scenes, it's a business model that's behind that. And it's a tough balance that these businesses are trying to manage because of the diversity of the users and their expectations. So that's our top 10 for the for 2013. I don't think any of them are new. I think it's just a re-emphasizing what things are really important here. I'll go right back through it. What Stan referred to as APT, often associated with state-sponsored espionage, monster DDoS attacks, improving security while migrating to the cloud. What was referenced by Tom Cross as the password debacle. And I think that really is we have to do something about passwords here. Sabotage of computer networks, whereas previously it had been basically stealing information, now there's at least a strong resistance case of literally sabotaging. Botnets, the continued evolution of that technology, insider threats, mobile malware, treating critical IT infrastructure as critical, and last on the list here is privacy protection and perception. So with that, let's go ahead and take a quick look at the internet weather over the last week here. I wouldn't describe any of these as significant developments, but certainly some things that we want to be paying attention to. And we had mentioned earlier in the program, and we've been mentioning over and over again, I kind of feel almost like a weatherman in some respects here. I'm kind of reporting the same things in different cycles here, but this is once again scanning activity associated with that's attributable to this security surveillance camera DVR botnet. Most of the active sources are in the U.S. and China. Although China is a little bit of a new development here, it looks like a lot more infections that are part of this botnet are in China now than we'd previously seen. And in this case, what it's doing is scanning on DNS, and it's scanning using both 53 UDP and 53 TCP. So it's probing pretty aggressively, at least over the last few days here. I was showing on December 15th up through the beginning of the 19th here, actually at the end of the 18th. And we're basically showing two things here. One is the number of sources that we're scanning on that port, and that peaked up at around 40,000 sources that we saw at a particular hour there. And then we also saw a sort of a surge in the number of probes. Now, as you can see, there are also a lot of other sort of spikes in probing activity on that port. And so we can only really kind of conjecture what the objective here is. I tend to get DNS reflection attacks or DNS amplification attacks on my mind. So perhaps they're looking around for DNS resolvers, maybe authoritative resolvers, which have been included in these denial of service attacks more recently, as well as open DNS resolvers that could be used for reflection attacks. The next one item, again, associated with that same botnet, I'm not sure what this one is going after in terms of functionality. I think there was a backdoor associated with this port, but this was scan sources and scan probes, again, on a different port here. This is 49,152, 49152 TCP. And this was just a surge in activity recently. We saw up to around 7,000 sources scanning on this port. And again, as I'd mentioned, associated with this DVR botnet. And I neglected to update this, but it indicates that searching for DNS servers, this was an error in that. The next item here is scan sources and scan probes on port 3544 TCP. And actually, I'll correct that. I think this was actually 3544 UDP. And most of the sources here are in Asia. There's a lot of them associated in Hong Kong and in Korea. And there are also a reasonable number of participants in the United States as well. There's a chance that this is associated with gaming. It does not appear to be P2P activity or peer-to-peer activity. I'm drawing that conclusion based on how the ephemeral points are assigned associated with this. That's a theory on my part. There's a chance that this is innocuous, that is, that being associated with gaming, it could be that a new game was introduced or a new version of a game that caused a resurgence or an adjustment in the way it communicates. Not really sure about that, but it certainly does show sort of a growth in activity that's taking place, both in the number of sources and the number of probes that are associated with it. So we're going to be keeping an eye on this and investigate it a little bit further to see if we can find out what's really going on here. This next item is scanning activity on port 0 TCP. We've seen examples like this in the past, and this one is it shows up every once in a while. This one actually had the source port fixed to 0 TCP as well, and it appears to be actually a Christmas tree attack. That is, all of the flags are set in the packets here, and the objective usually in these cases is to try to get an idea of what type of operating system or some of the characteristics of the operating system on targets that are being probed here. There were basically a handful in the order of a dozen or so sources that were participating in this activity. Invariably, they were basically hosted sources, that is, cloud servers or in some other sort of hosting center. They were in U.S., United States, Russia, China, and Kazakhstan. So this is clearly, they were coordinated, that is, all of those servers were acting in cohesion, that is, having the same behavior and working basically in the same time frames. And as you can see here, there were some periods, we're showing scan flows here and periods where it was getting up into the tens of millions of probes per hour. So I don't know, maybe this is the Christmas tree attack is just a celebration of the holidays coming up here, but perhaps they're really looking to characterize some servers out there.
Trying to find Santa's servers.
Santa server? That's a good possibility. They should direct those to the North Pole. I think they'd have a greater chance of finding them there. And next one here, we have basically our traditional pie chart of probing activity. We won't spend a lot of time on this because it's basically typical of what we've seen in the past. Scanning activity on database applications, remote server applications, SSH, Telnet, web servers, actually both MySQL Server as well as Microsoft SQL Server in here. And then we also see the P2P activity associated with the zero-access botnet that continues forward. I should mention there's also the port 445 TCP that invariably is in there because of the configure infections and such. And similarly, in terms of the most sources that are doing the probing, similar scenario here. We're seeing a lot of the same typical activity. I think one of the things that's notable is that port 23 TCP is well and above, or actually at least competing with port 445 TCP in terms of the number of sources that are probing. And I did not investigate it specifically, but usually this is associated with activity of that security surveillance camera botnet. There are others that are probing for this, but typically looking for weak passwords or no password settings. So, we talked about the password problem a little bit earlier today. That's certainly one of the contexts. And with that, any final comments from the group here?
Merry Christmas, Happy New Year.
Yeah, thanks very much. I told my kids that I was going to take a king-size pillowcase and put it out for my stocking this year, so I expect it to get filled. And I hope they don't get the same idea, however. So
a lot of new machines will get plugged in over the next couple of weeks, too. So
yeah,
could be good, could be bad. Opportunities for somebody, probably.
Invariably we see an increase in attack activity or sort of botnet-related activity over the holidays. That's at least been traditionally the case. I suspect, college students that are trying to make an extra buck or, have a little extra time to take on their side job that perhaps is a little on the malicious side. But so we'll be watching out for that as well as other types of attack activity. But we continue on. So with that, thanks, guys, for joining us today. That's the show. And if you'd like to get in touch with us, you can contact us through email. It's at threattrack@list.att.com. The video program's available on YouTube as well as the att.com/threattrack website. An audio version is available through FeedBurner as well as iTunes. And last but not least, again, thank you, Michael. Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Stan, for joining today. I'm Brian Rexroad. We will not be back next week. We're going to go ahead and take the week between Christmas and New Year's off from recording an episode unless anything extraordinary comes through. So we look forward to seeing you next year. And until then, keep your network safe.